Bona vesprada, buenas tardes a todas y todos. Voy a expresarme en castellano porque Maxwell Boykoff, nuestro invitado de esta tarde, entiende un poquito el castellano y por lo tanto voy a hacer esta introducción inicial en castellano. Si me disculpáis, las personas que estáis acostumbradas a que en todos los actos utilicemos la lengua propia de la universidad. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Estamos en la mesa Carlos Hermenegildo, el vicerrector de investigación, Ana Mateu, que treballa en la revista Métode, y Maxwell Boykoff, que impartirá la conferencia preparada para hoy, que se enmarca dentro de una doble celebración. Por una parte, la celebración del número 100 de la revista Métode y, por otra parte, la celebración de que este espacio, la nau, hace 20 años se convirtió en centro cultural en un edificio que tiene 520 años y que es la Universidad de Valencia, una institución que es la Universidad de Valencia, ¿no? Por tanto, hemos querido sumar la trayectoria de Métode, la extraordinaria trayectoria, aunque joven frente al edificio, ¿no? Llegar a 100 números realmente es una cita muy importante. ¿Cuántas revistas comienzan su camino y, desde luego, pues a los 10, 12, 15, 20 números se desaniman y ya no siguen, ¿no? Por lo tanto, estamos ante una revista que es extraordinaria por su calidad, pero también por su persistencia en un modelo de transmisión del conocimiento científico con la máxima calidad. Yo voy a hablar muy brevemente sobre el 520 aniversario. Carlos Hermenegildo, el compañero del equipo de gobierno, vicerrector de investigación, hablará de la revista, y a Ana Mateu le ha correspondido la tarea de presentar a nuestro conferenciante. Bueno, pues para las personas que no lo conozcáis, la Universidad de Valencia fue creada en 1499. Concretamente, sus constituciones se aprobaron un 30 de abril, el 30 de abril de 1499, y, por otra parte, el 6 de octubre de 1999, hace 20 años, tras una restauración muy importante de este edificio, se reconvirtió en centro cultural. Como sabéis, tiene una dimensión muy claramente patrimonial, no solo por el edificio en sí, sino porque alberga la biblioteca histórica y alberga otra serie de bienes artísticos, culturales y patrimoniales, pero también porque es un espacio de divulgación del conocimiento, de innovación, a través tanto de las exposiciones como de los distintos espacios y proyectos que tenemos en marcha en todas las áreas de la actividad humana, porque vinculada a la nau está la Orquesta Filarmónica, el grupo de danza o el grupo de Tabalet y Dolçaina, tanto como la sistemática actividad de exposiciones y conferencias que realizamos. Y creíamos que ese 20 aniversario de intensa dedicación a la cultura era también una ocasión para mostrar cómo la cultura, no solo la docencia y, por supuesto, después la investigación, la cultura está en los orígenes de la propia universidad. Cuando uno mira sus constituciones originarias, observa que hay un párrafo que dice que los sábados se celebrarán unas actividades que serían equivalentes a las conferencias de la actualidad. Se llamaban y se llamaron durante siglos las sabatinas, pero en realidad las podemos considerar como el antecedente de nuestras conferencias. Posteriormente, cuando estuvo aquí la Academia de San Carlos de Bellas Artes, se hizo una primera exposición, estamos hablando de 1773, y desde luego a partir de 1985, con anterioridad, 1980, que se crea ya un vicerrectorado de extensión universitaria, la actividad cultural crece en el conjunto del campus y especialmente en el edificio, y desde luego algunas personas hay aquí que además han sido protagonistas de ese proceso desde 1985 y especialmente desde 1999. El centro cada vez más tiene un protagonismo cultural tanto hacia la universidad como hacia la sociedad. En ese marco creíamos que era muy conveniente insertar también esta celebración del número 100 de la revista Métode. Próximamente inauguraremos una exposición. En esta ocasión de la exposición tendremos con nosotros a la rectora, hoy no podía acompañarnos y por lo tanto pues, pedimos disculpas porque no ha podido acompañarnos, pero ya tenemos cerrada la agenda para que el día de la exposición y de la próxima conferencia ella pueda estar presente. Y yo, sin más, le paso la palabra a Carlos Hermenegildo, que nos hablará, como vicerrector de investigación, nos hablará de la revista y de su trayectoria. Por favor, Carlos, tienes la palabra.
Pues buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias, Antonio, Martí, Ana. Quería saludar también al resto de miembros del equipo editorial de la revista, profesor Boykoff, queridos compañeros, señoras y señores. Lo primero, aparte de darles la bienvenida, desearles buenas tardes, a esta primera conferencia del ciclo de los grandes retos de la ciencia que organiza la revista Métode en la Universidad de Valencia, junto con la Escuela de Pensamiento Lluís Vives. Como adelantaba Antonio, la revista es una revista de divulgación científica que nació en 1992, impulsada por el Vicerrectorado de Investigación de esta universidad, y desde el primer momento ha ido creciendo, evolucionando, hasta consolidarse, como todos saben, como un referente en la divulgación científica, ya no solo en la Comunidad Valenciana, sino en toda España. Prueba de ello es que ha recibido numerosos premios, varios en los certámenes de Ciencia en Acción, el último, el Premio Especial del Jurado en octubre del año pasado, y también el Premio Especial del Jurado, entre otros. Para un vicerrector de investigación es una gran satisfacción contar con una publicación de esta calidad, dirigida por el profesor Martí Domínguez, y con un objetivo que es el de difundir el conocimiento. La universidad moderna no termina en la docencia, la investigación y la innovación. También tenemos que ser capaces de transferir el conocimiento a la sociedad mediante la divulgación del trabajo que realizan nuestros departamentos, nuestros institutos, nuestros laboratorios, nuestros centros de investigación, en definitiva. Hace unos días leía una reciente biografía sobre Santiago Ramón y Cajal, y ya en la portada ponía una de las frases de Santiago Ramón y Cajal en la que decía que la divulgación no se opone a la investigación, sino que la apoya y la complementa. Han pasado 100 años y todavía hay gente que duda del valor social, cultural e incluso desde el punto de vista científico de la divulgación. En un mundo cambiante como el actual, la ciencia juega un papel clave en la resolución de nuestros problemas y los retos. Y es más necesario que nunca intentar hacer llegar esa ciencia a la sociedad. Nos encontramos con retos que plantean cuestiones éticas, como la genética o la inteligencia artificial, otros que requieren una acción social y política rápida, como el cambio climático o los problemas de la alimentación. Hay otros que requieren de acciones sociosanitarias. Hoy es el Día de las Enfermedades Raras. Esta mañana teníamos algún acto en la Facultad de Medicina y es necesario actuar con la sociedad y estar ligados, en este caso, a los pacientes para desarrollar ciencia que acabe mejorando a la sociedad. Iniciativas como la revista Métode ayudan a conseguir ese diálogo entre sociedad y ciencia o entre investigación y la sociedad. Desde su nacimiento, Métode no ha parado de crecer. Se inició como una publicación en valenciano. Más tarde desarrolló la publicación en castellano. Después desarrolló la página web, donde se ha potenciado su presencia en redes y donde se ha incrementado el alcance de sus publicaciones. También tiene libros de divulgación, monografías Métode, que además ofrecen un complemento en formato de libros para historia natural, vulcanología o etnobotánica, que me consta que están siendo utilizados en secundaria para impartir clases de biología y de ciencias. Es una divulgación cuidadosa, rigurosa, con un especial énfasis en la calidad y en la presentación atractiva de los resultados. y es el sello de método en los 100 años 100 números que cumplimos. Más recientemente, 27 años, 100 números. Más recientemente, Métode empezó a publicar el Métode Science Studies Journal, que es una apuesta para consolidarse como una revista en el ámbito del pensamiento científico, en inglés, incluida los principales índices de impacto y de calidad, con contenido evaluado por evaluadores externos y con un comité científico internacional. Personalmente, quiero destacar que, además de una revista de divulgación científica, es una revista que abre sus puertas, sus páginas, a artistas, filósofos, sociólogos, historiadores, literatos, consiguiendo una revista formalmente muy atractiva, no solo por su contenido, sino también por su forma. Las portadas son un atractivo escaparate para artistas diversos y seguro que la exposición de las 100 portadas de Métode, que, como adelantaba Antonio, se abrirá próximamente, será una ocasión para recordar los 27 años de Métode que son parte de la historia de la universidad. Es una revista necesaria en el panorama actual, necesaria para difundir la ciencia, para dar voz a la comunidad científica y para servir, como decíamos, puente entre academia y sociedad. Son efemérides, son los 100 números de Métode, es una buena ocasión para recordarlo, y con esta serie de actividades que empezamos reivindicamos su papel, haciendo que es lo que siempre ha hecho Métode, que es comunicar la ciencia y fomentar el debate y el espíritu crítico sobre aquellos temas de actualidad científica que tienen un impacto en nuestras vidas. Muchas gracias a todos por su presencia en este acto y muchas gracias a todo el equipo editorial de la revista, especialmente Martí, por tu trabajo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Carlos, por tus palabras. Efectivamente, comunicación de calidad con una estética cuidadísima y muy atractiva. Y, por otra parte, una cabecera, Métode, de la cual Martí y yo hemos hablado en los últimos meses. La palabra métode hace 400 años, justamente ahora, por estas fechas, que Descartes, Bacon, ¿no?, estaban trabajando en el método. Galileo un poquito antes, pero, en definitiva, justo podemos hablar de que hace 400 años también nacía el método científico. Bien, para hablar de ciencia en la sociedad contemporánea, está organizado este ciclo y, como ya he comentado antes, Ana Mateu, desde la revista Métode, nos presentará a nuestro conferenciante de hoy. Por favor, Ana.
Sí, buenas tardes. Antes de presentar a nuestro conferenciante, a mí me gustaría comentar, ¿no?, que desde la revista Métode estamos muy contentos de celebrar estos 100 números y además hacerlo en el marco del aniversario de la NAU y también de la Escuela Europea de Pensamiento Lluís Vives. Queremos agradecer al Vicerrectorado de Cultura el apoyo que nos ha dado para esta celebración, como decía, en este marco. Y bueno, como ha indicado también el Vicerrector de Investigación, Carlos Hermenegildo, la revista Métode es una iniciativa que nace de este vicerrectorado y me gustaría subrayar precisamente esta confluencia, ¿no?, de colaboración entre cultura e investigación, porque también aquí subyace un poco la idea que de Métode también que potenciamos y que en la que trabajamos, que es que precisamente la ciencia es cultura. Para conmemorar estos 100 números iniciamos hoy este ciclo de conferencias bajo el título Los grandes retos de la ciencia, que en la misma idea también del número 100, que está disponible a partir de hoy y que además con una doble portada especial del artista Manuel Sáez, que lo tenéis aquí. Y bueno, es un ciclo para, también siguiendo la línea de la revista, abrir el debate y la reflexión sobre cuestiones científicas y sobre cómo la ciencia nos puede ayudar ante los desafíos del futuro. Por eso, para inaugurar el ciclo, creo que no podíamos haber elegido otro tema como es el que nos ocupa hoy, que es el cambio climático, un fenómeno que nos afecta a todos los niveles y que es una de las grandes cuestiones a las que debemos hacer frente y, además, yo creo que de forma urgente. Hoy contamos con nosotros con el profesor Maxwell Boykoff, a quien le damos la bienvenida y le agradecemos enormemente su presencia aquí. Maxwell Boykoff es director del Centro de Investigación en Política Científica y Tecnológica del Instituto de Investigación en Ciencias Ambientales de la Universidad de Colorado Boulder, en los Estados Unidos. Es profesor del programa de Estudios Ambientales de esta universidad, donde además codirige una iniciativa, la iniciativa Inside the Greenhouse, que es un proyecto muy interesante, donde se potencia que los estudiantes realicen, diseñen, piensen, en definitiva, ¿no?, en otras formas de comunicar el cambio climático para profundizar, para ahondar en la concienciación de este fenómeno en la sociedad. Sus intereses son variados alrededor de este tema, se centran en políticas culturales y gobernanza ambiental, comunicación científica y medioambiental, en la adaptación al clima y en las interacciones entre ciencia y política y entre economía y medio ambiente. Él tiene una extensa producción científica en este sentido. En 2011 publicó el libro Who Speaks for the Climate, que es un libro muy recomendable para si queréis profundizar en la cuestión de la representación mediática del cambio climático. En la revista Método lo pudimos entrevistar a Maxwell Boykoff en 2013 en un número dedicado precisamente a la comunicación de la ciencia, y él ya nos advertía de que una mayor cobertura mediática del cambio climático, por ejemplo, no implicaba necesariamente un mejor conocimiento sobre este fenómeno, que son cuestiones también sobre las que debemos reflexionar. Y también nos apuntaba a que los nuevos medios y canales de información, ¿no?, como herramientas a tener en cuenta para conseguir una información más democrática, implicar al público y potenciar el análisis y reflexión sobre cambio climático. También colaboró en el número 85 de Método, un número que dedicamos al cambio climático y en el que él participó con un artículo muy interesante donde contextualizaba los movimientos escépticos o negacionistas del cambio climático en los Estados Unidos, y que os podéis consultar también en nuestra web si os interesa. En la conferencia de hoy nos presenta algunos de los puntos que trata en su último libro, que nos comentaba que estará disponible en verano, Creative Climate Communications, donde analiza los esfuerzos que se aprovechan de la creatividad para comunicar el cambio climático, con el objetivo de entender mejor cuál es la forma más efectiva de llegar al público, de comunicar este fenómeno en el siglo XXI. De todo esto nos hablará un poco a continuación, y yo, sin más, ya creo que os dejamos con él. Gracias.
Pues muchas gracias a ustedes por la oportunidad de hablar con ustedes hoy. Bueno, voy a hablar no en castellano, pero en valenciano, ¿está bien? No, en inglés. No tengo la confianza de hablar por hora y media. Hora y media y, bueno, vamos al partido de Valencia frente Betis, ¿no? Copa del Rey. No. Pues gracias a todos, gracias a María. I will be presenting in English. It is a real opportunity to be here. I really appreciate the hospitality of my hosts, Ana Mateo, Martí Dominguez, Antonio, Carlos. This is a wonderful place to be in celebration of an important university, an important journal, and an important cultural center coming together in a really unique formation. So I hope that you all value these opportunities. So I come to you from Boulder, Colorado, and it's also a center of a great deal of climate change research. And so what I'll be focusing in on my talk today will be on the communication part of that climate change research. We often focus in on climate change scientific research, and I sit in an institute, this Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences, largely with natural and physical scientists. But what I will be focusing in on is a lot of work that's being done in the social sciences and then also the humanities. So as we know, anthropogenic climate change is one of the most prominent and existential challenges of the 21st century. It is, in essence, a collective action problem. It's a consequence of our shared behaviors that cut to the heart of how we have been living, working, playing, and relaxing in modern society. So this is an issue that is filled with many deep-seated paradoxes that we know well, makes it a topic that exposes the frivolity and the failings of the human race, of us. Some examples include the paradox, essentially, that as greater scientific understanding improves, rather than that, settling associated questions about what to do in the face of 21st century climate change, it actually unearths and brings up more questions to be answered. A second paradox can be that people at the forefront of climate impacts are rarely those that have the privileged opportunity to sit before you here, to engage in these kinds of conversations. And despite that they often do have small carbon footprints, they are the ones to feel the first effects of climate change here and now. So amid our very well-funded and improving and advancement of scientific research into the causes and consequences of climate change, essentially the argument I put before you and the argument that I've put in this book is that climate communications and our everyday conversations about climate change in our lives remain relatively stuck. This has been due to low levels of coordination, to understand what works, how, when, why, under what circumstances, and with what effect. This also is a consequence of low levels of funding to the social sciences, to humanities, that can then collaborate and partner with natural and physical sciences to address these challenges. And so we often find ourselves, when we move from this scientific way of knowing about climate change into the questions about what do, we remain stuck often at an individual level of engagement. And I will talk a little bit more about the different ways in which many people over time have tried to communicate this issue through scientific ways of knowing. And one of the arguments that I make is that this is just one of many ways of engaging and learning about these important issues. So what we need to enhance engagement, to break what is sometimes called a climate silence in our everyday lives, to overcome partisanship, politicization, polarization, is to think about new avenues and pathways for learning, understanding, and finding common ground on climate change. So the book, as you can see on this slide, it comes out this summer. And another one of the main theses I put forward is basically that there is no silver bullet. I'm sorry to tell you this if you didn't know it already, to communication about climate change. Instead, this is about a smartening up of a process of understanding what kinds of communication strategies can work for certain audiences and in certain places. And this is what I and others have called silver buckshot, where there are many different approaches. There is certainly a time and place for everything in terms of communication, but the tactics that are involved are to find common ground on climate change are this more engaged type of approach. And so progress doesn't happen on its own. This requires multi-scale, from individual to collective struggles, but this also is part of an empowerment of experimentation, of investments in the bridging of science and society, much like this cultural center represents. And so the book that I've been working on is analyzed and evaluated these different creative endeavors and tried to learn from many different projects that have, including some of my own, that have been undertaken through time to better understand what constitutes creative and thereby effective climate communications. So to provide a little bit of context, there are many different scientific ways of knowing. These often come through scientific reports. They can come through announcements from scientific organizations. They can come from new research moving into the public arena. And this has become a well-worn path of information deficit model logic. That is to say that if we just give people more scientific information about climate change, they will make the right decision. We find in our lives that this is very complicated. All of you may be well-versed in the climate sciences, yet we engage in what could be seen as contradictory practices at the individual to the collective level. Suzanne Mosier, who's an important communications scholar, among other things, has talked about how providing information and filling these knowledge gaps is necessary but rarely sufficient to create the kind of active behavioral engagement that's needed. And I would add to that is needed on a sustained and long-term basis. So moving into this consideration of communication and stepping beyond merely scientific ways of knowing, it is very easy to pollute much more easy to pollute the waters of productive discourse than it is to keep them clean and useful. But I'll talk about how, in some ways, that focusing merely on this scientific way of knowing can squander opportunities for engagement in other ways. And I won't get into this too much this evening in my prepared remarks, but this is what has really given rise in some ways at the cultural, psychological level to the advent and to the amplification of outlier, contrarian, denier perspectives. So in terms of other ways of knowing about this, you can see social movements arising. This captures a few protest signs from a March for Science, for the Climate March. And this is another way in which scientists themselves and research academics have been engaging to communicate about their concerns on climate change. And so they've been part of a larger collective movement. The questions still remain, do these responses match the scale of these challenges? And so this happens to be one of my favorite, which melds these different ways of knowing, but in the public sphere. So again, the theses that I put before you are twofold. First, we've needed sorely to have a sustained assessment of creative climate communications that then provides a useful and needed resource and guide for many audiences. I've put forward an effort to put together this book for those of you who are interested in these subjects, and it is heavily referenced so that you can use this as a starting point to then delve into other issues, such as the use of imagery in shaping climate change communications, such as the use of music or sonification of data and other forms of communicating creatively about these subjects. So this also helps move, as Anna had mentioned in her introduction, help me move from media representations of climate change, predominantly news media representations, into multimodal communications. And so this is a different way of performance, of experiential learning, of other ways of addressing this issue in creative dimensions. And it's helped through a set of research projects, and I'll share some of these with you today, helped open up as we see pathways for greater engagement. And then secondly, this is a part of what is considered to be a way to smarten up communications about climate change. And this can be to match the demands of a 21st century communications environment. I'm thoroughly impressed by the team of folks that are here at the Cultural Center at the university who've been promoting this celebration, this deserved celebration of the journal, and ways in which you can reach beyond just the audience that's here with us today. And this is, some have talked about this as dumbing down. I've heard many members of the scientific community saying that they have to dumb this down for the general public. This is actually a smartening up and an increasing sophistication of communication in the 21st century. So this is what provides possibilities for greater meaning and for greater connectivity in the public sphere. So together, what I have done here is it tries to work to understand what is working, where, when, why, and under what conditions. It seeks to integrate these lessons. There is no magic recipe book for effective communication about climate change. However, as a social science and humanities community, we have certainly learned certain things from the work that we've done. And this seeks to make some sense of that. And as I conclude my talk, my prepared remarks, I have some of those paths of guidance for you to talk through. And then thirdly, it seeks to improve, again, our understanding that there is no silver bullet, that this takes many different forms of communication. For all of you being here tonight, this is one of many ways in which we can meet together and find common ground on climate change. So just a note then about audiences. This has been written in a way, it's for Cambridge University Press, to help facilitate, catalyze ongoing research, ongoing work with practitioners who seek to improve the effectiveness of climate change communications. This then bridges into natural and physical sciences work. This is also written in a way that can be resonant with students who are our future leaders, who are our maybe current at times, but largely future content producers and knowledge brokers on this critical issue. And then this also seeks to engage with influentials in the public sphere who want to direct their energies and possibly funding to sustaining communication endeavors. So that can be political decision makers, that can also be influentials such as cultural figures as well. So the chosen title, you may have noticed that the title climate is in parentheses. And the reason that I've done that deliberately is for two reasons. One is so that I've written it in a way that can be useful for other connected subjects, genetically modified organisms, considerations around vaccinations, nuclear power, stem cell research, homelessness, student loan debt even, many of the science issues, but as they then bridge into social issues as well. Some of the science issues that will be taken up in future conferences and talks going forward. Secondly, importantly to me, is to communicate from the outset that when one is mindful of their audiences and their contexts, that the creative and effective communications about climate change may not involve invoking these terms climate change explicitly. So again, it makes the argument that we ought not shy away from ultimately confronting 21st century climate change, but we must smarten up our communications and be creative. That there are places, there are times for all forms of communication, but to really meet common ground, naming, shaming, blaming of others can end up castigating and alienating certain points of view and prove counterproductive to the kind of work that we need for collective action. So there is a kind of discipline that's involved in the communication process here that is a commitment to respectful, open, considered dialogue about our common concerns. So something like in my country, the state of Texas, which culturally can be a very different context than where I live in Boulder, Colorado, something like instead of talking about climate change, you can talk about future-proofing. You can talk about resilience. You can talk about stewardship and responsibility. You can discuss infrastructure and transitions to renewable energy. The state of Texas in the United States is one of the most quickly transitioning states in terms of renewable energy. And so that is a way to open up these conversations and provide space and perspectives for creative approaches that can ultimately make progress on this critical issue. So in order to make this a bit more concrete, I want to step into an example for you all of the kind of work that I've investigated and the kind of work that I've been involved in. And that is a pathway to knowing about climate change through my engagement with the arts and bridging the arts and sciences together. This kind of creativity isn't merely for the sake of creativity. That can at times work against effectiveness. We've seen this in a number of different works. This is creativity that's directed towards creative and towards effective communications. And so this can be an effort to find common ground, to find that missing middle, and to support and foster spaces of collaboration, research and practice, and to then contribute to innovative scholarship. So this can advance the value of our entanglements and accelerate our collective learning. This is about tailored communication strategies. So this particular project is about comedy and climate change. So I've engaged in this among a number of topics in this book, from post-truth and fake news to examining the 97% convergent agreement meme about scientists agreeing that humans can contribute to climate change, to thinking about advocacy, thinking about environmentalism in the 21st century, but then settling here for a little bit, we'll dwell on considerations of comedy and humor. So this can tap into complementary ways of knowing to to really help meet people where they are who otherwise may not take a scientific interest in climate change. So humor has generally been underutilized, but it has the power in the sciences to connect people, information, ideas, and new ways of thinking and acting. So we've seen around us, I've heard about projects here in Spain, certainly in the United States, an increasing way of accessing comedy to communicate about science and environmental issues. There is a certain power that flows through these humorous appeals. It can exploit cracks in arguments. It can wiggle in, poke, prod, make a nuisance, draw attention to incongruities, to hypocrisies, to falsehoods, to pretentiousness. It can also then reveal certain sets of truths, certain new ways of knowing and delight of discovery. So there is this power that flows through comedy that empowers certain content producers and communicators that otherwise may not have the training in the sciences to do that kind of work. So this particular project is one that I'm engaged in. I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end of my presentation, but Anna had mentioned this in the introduction. It's a project called Inside the Greenhouse. And this is with an ecology and evolutionary biology professor, Rebecca Safran, and a theater professor, Beth Osnes, who we founded this in 2012 to try to create a space to experiment and evaluate the effectiveness of certain forms of communication about climate and the environment. In the last year, we've also had a communications professor join us, Phaedra Pizzulo, at the University of Colorado. So this particular project we've now been undertaking for 4 years. We've just written up a piece of it in the Journal of Political Geography with Beth Osnes, where we experiment with on-stage comedy with our students, primarily undergraduate students, but also graduate students, to take on different themes of climate change in humorous ways. From year to year, we've changed some of the topics. We've moved from being able to engage in any way they saw fit to requesting that they put together skits or stand-up comedy that is associated with humans' relationship with carbon. And then this year, actually coming up in April, we'll have a stand-up performance that's considered good nature comedy, one of the other flavors of comedy. There can be punching up in terms of addressing power through comedy. There can be punching down, which can be denigrating others. But this is seen to be peer-to-peer good-natured comedy. We also have an international video competition that, should any of you be interested in submitting comedic approaches to climate change, our deadline is April 15th. And over the years, we've now received contributions from 9 countries, not Spain yet, but it's very interesting to see these cultural interpretations of comedy. So the project itself has been one to try and overcome what can be seen to be a doom and gloom approach through scientific assessments to experiential, to narrative, to emotive, to relatable storytelling. We have been promoting this throughout the community where we live in Boulder, Colorado. At times we have shown this over Facebook as well. But we then examine it. Importantly, at our research institution, we then develop methods through participant surveys, through audience member surveys, by analyzing the performances put together themselves and participant observations to then assess how comedy has the power to influence public thought, understanding, and behavior over time. So climate change clearly has the potential to overwhelm everyday people. And so this is seen to be an effort to try to increase one's accessibility to what can be seen oftentimes as complex dimensions of climate issues. There are certain dangers that are associated with this. There can be this possibility that there can be this coping strategy that can be associated with climate change, that this can take us part of the way, but not all the way, towards necessary social change. However, this is a way to be entertaining in non-threatening ways. There are pathways and flavors that have the potential then to make these issues more approachable and meaningful, to make the content more digestible through compelling stories, and can then shepherd in new ways of knowing. So there are certain key ways that we investigate how this increases the salience or increases awareness about climate change, how this offers new routes to knowing about climate change, how this can increase accessibility and engage new audiences, how this may increase the retention of climate change information later, and how this can provide some relief amid anxiety of the causes and consequences of climate change. And then last, what's particularly pertinent in the United States context, that this can help bridge and overcome some polarized discussions about climate change in the public arena. So we did evaluate these specific offerings over time, and we have found that largely there is this capacity for engagement through humor that hasn't been accessed in the past. There is a flooding of the public arena nowadays, particularly in the United States, on television, through podcasts, where comedians are addressing not just climate change, but other science and environment issues in compelling ways. In this format, in terms of public performance, this was seen not just for the audience themselves, but also seen for the performers to build confidence in these dimensions of climate change. So certainly a lot of the performers who we had put up to this task had talked about how this can be like mixing oil and water, that this can be very difficult to take something very serious, make it funny without trivializing important issues. There can also be a lot of anxiety that's associated with the effectively trying to entertain while inform. But this power of comedy was seen to open up a lot of spaces. There is also a performative and interactive set of elements that are involved with comedy, the way in which we performed it at these sets of events. That there is this generous laughing for the comedian who lands a joke. This is reminiscent of this notion of active spectatorship by Jacques Rancière, who talks about how there can be this kind of audience shaping the collective meaning of performance. We also found that younger people certainly discovered that this is a much more appealing way of approaching these types of oftentimes doom and gloom type subjects. And so this movement towards solutions orientations, this movement towards empowerment was seen to be largely positive with everyone that was attending these events. So this can be seen as possibly a place of hope and optimism, particularly for younger people. Maria Ohala has found that increasing adolescence in climate-related issues and increasing their access to appealing channels of information can promote their own problem solving. And we certainly had found that our work had been consistent with that. However, it is important to also mention that there can be a danger of, with these performances, of atomizing or individualizing movements for change. And so there is a natural discussion of individual actions that can be taken, taking shorter showers, turning off the lights, these sorts of things. But in the face of the scale of the challenges involved, this apparent production of subversion through comedy is really just reinscribing and reinstating power. So it provides this site of sedation as much as an opportunity for subversion and for rethinking and re-engaging. So there is this power of salve, there's this power of some relief. There is also this seed for change that can exist within comedy and meeting people where they are. So having engaged in this work and ongoing work here, really think a lot about how comedy is either easy or impossible. That there is this challenge of how you can engage in both the content and the context together to mattering in particular places. And what is worth pointing out for this discussion this evening and for this audience in particular, is that jokes are expressive of the social situations in which they occur. So this is a quote from anthropologist Mary Douglas, but there are many ways in which we had engaged in a US-specific brand of comedy, and it's very interesting and work that remains to be done to see how this translates to other contexts. So that is, in a way, an invitation to engage in these experimental spaces as well. A couple of examples of some of the US comedic moments through the lens of politics, just to ground this a bit more, in the public arena. You may or may not have heard that this was a Senator James Inhofe from the state of Oklahoma, a Republican who, in a snowstorm, very snowy day in Washington, D.C. in February of 2015, brought a snowball, as you can see, onto the floor of the U.S. Senate and held it up and made a performance of this, saying, "Do you know what this is?" and calling into question that the globe was warming because there was a heavy snowstorm in Washington, D.C. This was seen to be funny. This captured a lot of media attention, but it may not have had the impact that he had intended in terms of really questioning climate change. He ended up being a bit of the court jester in that case. As a second example, just very briefly, Barack Obama, when he was president, had spoken to the White House Correspondents' Dinner along with comedian Michael Key, and had been making the case for certain social issues, and Michael Key was his translator, who was called the anger translator. And so he was calming down Barack Obama as they were going forward, and this was another brand of comedy in this case. And then third, our current president of the United States, Donald Trump, was speaking at the United Nations General Assembly this past fall in New York City in 2018, and had said on the floor of the UN General Assembly that the United States had been a leader on climate change, and he garnered a tremendous laugh from the chamber, and it was very unsettling for him. And so these are three different ways of laughter and humor and comedy that can be intended, misintended, or unexpected, that can unsettle these kinds of situations and provide pathways for new ways of knowing about climate and environment. So with a limited amount of time, I want to turn to, just for now, some of the ideas of a roadmap that I've put forward here. There are 5 rules of the road and then 5 features of a roadmap. Again, noting that it is important to consider the spatial context across cultural spaces, political spaces, and as well as the temporal context, thinking about what's working in 2019 and what may work 10 years from now, and considering the different cultural, social, political, environmental, economic conditions that matter here. So again, there is not a recipe book, and really archaic views are ones that take up the perspective that communication and engagement in the public sphere can be put together as some set of ingredients. This is a way to then provide that context-sensitive, audience-sensitive, time-sensitive way to address climate change. So as a first set of rules of the road, and I break these down in much more detail than I will here, but first, being very authentic. There is something to authenticity that can help increase the efficacy or effectiveness of climate change communications. So if you are not an evangelical preacher, it may not be as effective to authentically speak to evangelical religious groups. Secondly, be ambitious. That many of the safe pathways to talking about climate change can then again reduce us into these individualized, atomized spaces for action. And there needs to be more ambition. And thirdly, be accurate. This hopefully goes without saying for the most part, but to be scientifically accurate, to be accurate about the politics of the situations is tremendously important. Third, being imaginative is another way of talking about engaging creatively and through innovation in these spaces. And then last, be bold with your communications. A set of commitments to the work that you do has tremendous effect. So I'll put up all 5 right now. Essentially, this is about a commitment to finding common ground and meeting people where they are on climate change. As I had mentioned before, that there is certain immediate value or maybe some cathartic value to naming and shaming of certain villains in climate change, but it's actually about some of the work to be done about meeting people where they are through that engagement, that respectful, oftentimes respectful listening and dialogue. And social change often begins as well as a conversation. Secondly, emphasizing how communication affects us here and now in our everyday lives. We may see this all around us, and it's important to emphasize that climate change isn't a distant threat that affects others in other places, that we can start to now draw on scientific ways of knowing to better understand how extreme events, how certain patterns of weather that add up to changes in the climate affect us in our everyday lives now. Thirdly, focusing in on climate change engagement is a way to actually talk about how our lives can get better. Walkable spaces, like here in Valencia, are dramatically different than some of the spaces that you may have encountered if you visited the United States or other parts of the world. That those ways of talking about changing infrastructure, policy decision-making that ultimately makes our lives better is effective in these arenas. Fourthly, creatively empowering people to take meaningful and purposeful action on climate change is important. So constructing communication strategies that help people feel as though and understand that they do in fact have agency over the process of their individual lives in terms of the food on their plate or their decisions of how you get to this particular talk and back and so forth. How that can then also scale up into the kinds of decision-making, the kinds of voting patterns that then shape action on climate change. And then last, to bring us back to this notion of smartening up our communications about climate change. This is about honestly, carefully assessing how climate change can affect a spectrum of possible action, of meaningful, substantial, sustained responses to contemporary climate challenges. This can be about living gracefully in this shared and changing world, because it does cut to the heart of all of our activities and actions, from whether we choose to have children or how many, again, our food choices. We need storytelling leadership to make sense of this collective challenge. So as I mentioned before, I am not just an arm's length researcher on these topics, I'm also an embedded actor. And so this again is a project called Inside the Greenhouse. I think I actually have some stickers if you're interested in that. It is a project that provides a living laboratory at the university to have an intentional space to experiment, to empower, to create conversations, but then to evaluate them. And so part of being at the research institution provides us an opportunity to then analyze, again, what works, how, when, why, and under what circumstances. So some of these pictures that you see here are some of the projects where we've engaged some of the different topics, in addition to comedy, of humanizing public figures on climate change, of examining how academic climate advocacy influences climate communication, and so forth. And so I welcome you, I welcome you to learn more about the work that we're doing there, but I also welcome you to replicate this in places where you are, because certainly the work that we're doing at this scale has proven to be successful with the students, with the community members with whom we interact, with the other researchers that continue to work on these subjects, but they certainly don't match the scale of the challenge in other places. So this is, the name of Inside the Greenhouse actually was a deliberative way to signal that to varying degrees we're all implicated in part of, as well as responsible for, greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And so being inside the greenhouse involves collaborations, intersections with the larger community to work to retell stories about climate change and become meaningful, constructive, and sustained content producers. So when I finished this book up, I ended up getting to a place of searching for meaning. And so through these communication strategies, essentially trying to help us better understand how we can overcome path dependency, political and institutional inertia, as it relates to our relationship with carbon-based energy generation and consumption. This is about hastening the process of decarbonization. In this process, nostalgia can certainly be a powerful intoxicant. There can be this yearning for an idyllic past. Dare I say that the Make America Great Again slogan is one of those examples of that intoxicant, of yearning for the way of considering that things aren't the way they used to be. So this perspective of over-reliance on nostalgia can then reduce the agency of young people today. And the struggles of today by millennials, by Generation Z, X, Y, Z, others, shouldn't feel constrained by markers of the past. So as I weave my way to a conclusion in this book and in this presentation, it really was a pathway to empower young people to find their voice. This is an issue where things certainly aren't the way that they used to be. In fact, if you were born into this world after 1984, you were born into a world where anomalous changes in the climate globally, month to month, are warmer than average. You were born into a world where this actually profiles global records, that the recent years have been the warmest. This is considered to be a new normal or a new abnormal. And so instead of choosing anger or resentment about how kids aren't the way that they used to be, choosing compassion and helping empower them to be the new content producers can help with the communication of urgency in creative ways about communication and pro-environmental lifestyles. So it helps us be more nimble, integrate lessons from previous climate and hence effective communication forays. It helps us be more agile in a changing communications ecosystem. And it can then help us bridge divides that impede progress on climate science and policy. So my efforts here in this presentation and in this contribution through the book help weave through some of the approaches, experiments, and struggles to understand these interactions at the human-environment interface and help us better understand the set of political and economic relations that can shape them. I haven't focused so much in on carbon-based industry interests, propping up outlier perspective as I mentioned, but I'm certainly happy to talk about that in our discussion that follows. So this was a long-form text that can help us then reimagine our discussions, reimagine our futures together. And so there is a certain level of ambition, leadership, and innovation, boldness and courage that's associated with these types of challenges. There's certainly much more work to be done, but we must redouble our efforts and get stuck in rather than getting stuck in these issues. So I hope that my prepared remarks offer us at least a productive foundation for a discussion that will follow. And I hear the bells of 8 p.m., and so I feel that might be a good time to then welcome your questions. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias a Maxwell por tu exposición. Que creo que nos has puesto una serie de iniciativas interesantes, ¿no? Que yo creo que sobre todo lo interesante de su charla también es conocer las iniciativas que se están realizando en otros sitios que quizá podemos aplicar aquí para explorar, ¿no?, estas nuevas comunicaciones, ayudar a la gente joven a encontrar su voz, ¿no?, en la comunicación del cambio climático y a reflexionar sobre estas cuestiones. Si tenéis cuestiones o alguna pregunta que plantear.
Soy Amparo Cervera, soy profesora en la Universidad de Valencia. Vale. En primer lugar, pues agradecer la iniciativa. Cuando se me invitó a esta conferencia y leí el título, me parecía que era una iniciativa muy interesante y bueno, ya que he venido a escuchar. Y en primer lugar, pues agradecer la iniciativa al vicerrectorado de la Universidad de Valencia y a continuación al profesor Maxwell por su interesante presentación. A mí se me han planteado dos dudas escuchándole porque, bueno, pues investigamos en estos temas y es muy interesante, pues eso que ha comentado de esa dependencia del tiempo y del espacio y de la cultura, ¿no?, en las acciones de comunicación. Y yo tengo dos preguntas para hacerle. La primera es, Dado que en las redes sociales perdimos la batalla hace años con llamarlo cambio climático y no calentamiento global. Entonces, mi primera pregunta sería si deberíamos, de alguna forma, los que trabajamos en comunicación, volver al concepto de calentamiento global y abandonar la terminología cambio climático. Eso sería una primera pregunta que me ha surgido de su interesante. Me ha parecido lo de la comedia muy original y muy interesante. La segunda pregunta que tenía era que en esas guidelines que ha propuesto para las futuras acciones, los que trabajamos en comunicación social nos encontramos con que cuando trabajamos con jóvenes, y eso pues hemos hecho estudios informales, pero hemos hecho estudios con el tema de conducir y beber, por ejemplo, hicimos un estudio precisamente para la Universidad de Valencia con el maltrato de libros en la biblioteca Gregory Mayans del campus de sociales, ¿no? Entonces nos encontramos con que inicialmente las propuestas iban de comunicar en términos de, bueno, pues cursos de formación, hablábamos con la directora de la biblioteca y cuando hicimos el estudio nos dimos cuenta que casi lo único que convencía a la gente joven era la comunicación del castigo que iban a recibir si no cumplían en este caso en tráfico, pues con problemas de multas o en la biblioteca con multas también, etcétera. Claro, cuando tuvimos estos resultados en ambos ámbitos, fuimos a hablar con una psicopedagoga para que nos intentara aclarar un poco y nos dijo que, claro, esto viene como consecuencia de los procesos de educación premio-castigo, por ejemplo, que existen en países como España todavía, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, al ver sus guidelines for future en temas de comunicación, si esto es un tema más español o más europeo, si es proyectable a Estados Unidos y lo que le preguntaba al principio sobre la terminología global warming o calentamiento global. Gracias.
That's a great question. There are many researchers who are working on these kinds of questions in psychology. And so part of the work that I had done was to investigate what kinds of approaches had been successful. And definitely the penalties in considering it as a form of accountability has proven to be certainly successful across contexts and as well in the United States. And so in thinking about communication strategies that increase accountability for one's action, that can be very effective. So I'll give you an example that it maybe changes the way in which I heard the question in terms of there is a reward system in the United States with energy bills that has different faces that they put on them, comparing your energy consumption with your neighbors. And so if you have a happy face, you're doing well compared to your neighbors. If you have a very happy face, you're one of the best, and so forth and so on. And then you have sad faces if you're consuming more than the average person in your neighborhood. And that kind of way of thinking about your behavior relative to the collective is proven to be very effective in reducing energy consumption. And so those bills and those approaches is a creative form of communication about climate change. Also on terminology, I will say that there has been a lot of discussion over time about how effective it is to talk about these kinds of phenomena as climate change versus something else. Climate change is scientifically more accurate than global warming, whereas global warming really just focuses in on the temperature fingerprint of climate change, whereas climate change addresses precipitation changes, sea ice extent, many other factors that are impacted, sea level rise, and so forth. There has been other ideas put forward like global climate disruption or global weirding. And these are just simply devices to help people think about the ways in which we have made unprecedented changes unlike times before. And to that extent, I welcome them. And so I think that kind of creativity that I heard from your question are the very types of approaches that are needed. And the psychological sciences are working at that individual level to address those kinds of questions about what works. Thank you.
Hola.
Hola.
Gracias por la conferencia.
Gracias a ti.
Me ha llamado la atención cuando ha mencionado la posibilidad de comunicar sobre el cambio climático sin necesidad de mencionar el término cambio climático. Me ha recordado a algunos colegas míos de Estados Unidos que explican biología en primer año en la universidad y tienen que evitar la palabra que empieza por E, porque es una palabra demonizada. Pasaría algo parecido en la comunicación relacionada con los alimentos transgénicos en la Unión Europea. La palabra E empieza por evolución, claro. Y en la Unión Europea podría pasar lo mismo con palabras como organismo modificado genéticamente, transgénico. ¿Hasta qué punto no estamos entrando en una dinámica de autocensura en determinados términos que han sido demonizados por determinados sectores de la sociedad? ¿Y hasta qué punto esto no va en contra de una de sus 5 reglas, que es la de ser auténtico?
Okay. Gracias. Great question. And so this is part of the art of understanding your audience. This is part of doing the work to confront these issues, not shy away from them, but do it in a smart and careful fashion. And so there is a lot of danger to not mentioning the E word, evolution, because you may then overlook some of the critical components that you need to communicate. Same with climate change. In fact, in the United States, to give you another example, these are places that I'm much more familiar with, that the Obama administration in its first term had talked about many subjects related to climate change without naming climate change. It frustrated many proponents of climate action. In his second term, he began to immediately name climate change and address some of the key features, and that seemed to uplift much of his support and then compel and mobilize a lot of action on climate change. I definitely grant all of that. What I do say, though, so are you familiar with Harry Potter and some of the Harry Potter books? We don't want to get into a situation where we cannot dare say his name, Voldemort, right? That it is simply to have us give pause to, if you mention evolution, if you mention climate change, if you mention genetically modified organisms in certain audiences, you know when you immediately turn off those conversations. You know when you immediately create adversarial communication environments. And so to be mindful of that, I think can take us quite a long way on these issues. And so that's also to acknowledge that for some, when you're being careful like that for certain audiences, another audience may be dissatisfied that you're not naming it evolution, that you're not naming it climate change. But again, there's no silver bullet for this. Just to be mindful is what I'm requesting. Thank you.
Hola.
Hola.
Gracias por su charla. Me ha interesado mucho. Como científico trabajo en un centro de investigación de aquí de la Universidad de Valencia. Una de las cosas que me preocupan es que en ciencia frecuentemente tenemos dudas o tenemos un margen de error importante en nuestros descubrimientos y esto a la hora de comunicar nos supone un hándicap porque parece vernos ante el público que es que no sabemos cuál es el problema o no conocemos realmente la dimensión del problema. ¿Cuál sería su consejo? ¿Cuál sería su idea al respecto de este problema?
Thank you. I didn't hear the translation, but I think I understood the question anyway. So uncertainty is a big challenge. It is something that I've addressed in previous work in thinking about the different dimensions of uncertainty, because there's uncertainty in terms of precision. There's uncertainty in terms of, say, in the case of climate change, better understanding climate sensitivity. What is the transient climate response to inputs of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere? But then there are unknown unknowns. There are the kinds of uncertainties that we don't yet have a handle on. And dealing with all that in the public sphere I think as you point out, has a danger of creating an atmosphere where we're all confused. Those of us working on it don't know what we're talking about. That's not true at all. And so it's about communicating carefully those things that we know well and the areas where there remains important, vigorous debate and discussion and work for discovery. And so to give you an example of that, in the work, I had gotten into very specifically a much debated and discussed topic around 97% consensus. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that, this is the shortcut to saying that 97% of relevant expert climate scientists agree that humans contribute to climate change. And so to communicate that to different segments of the public is seen to be a shortcut to say, this part is something that we know very well. We can talk about uncertainty about other things. So where there is some disagreement in the communications community is that some may feel that that's alienating or disempowering to them as someone listening to that communication. You can think that it can be, all these people are on board, so you should get on board too. And there is this pushback that people may say, that's all well and good, but that's not my consensus. And that's precisely the finding of a researcher at the University of Michigan, Josh Pasek, where he's found that there are certain communities, and he studied in the United States, that say this is not my consensus. So no one communication strategy will ever solve everything. I don't think the proponents of that 97% consensus meme or shortcut claim that. However, that can have adverse effects that we may not be aware of. And so uncertainty is a part of all of our lives. I will say, there's uncertainty about whether we're going to get home safely or be hit by a bus or taxi. Yet we navigate into these spaces because we deem these kinds of engagements worthwhile. We take out fire insurance even though fire is unlikely in our lives. And so there are different ways in which we can effectively communicate about that uncertainty around climate change. And it's another important feature of this set of challenges. Thank you.
Mi nombre es José Luis Muñoz, soy director de Climate Kick. Muchas gracias por su extraordinaria presentación. Me gustaría preguntarle, nosotros vemos en nuestra organización el cambio climático como un gran reto, pero también como una gran oportunidad. Una oportunidad de transformación de lo que hacemos actualmente. Y es una forma de comunicar en positivo, de que no es algo digamos, que nos puede asustar o nos puede frenar, sino también es algo a lo que, si vamos a ello, a dar una solución en positivo, nos puede dar lugar a nuevas oportunidades de transformar lo que hacemos, incluso mejorar. También lo identificamos como un aspecto que une distintas culturas, que une distintos enfoques, hasta incluso distintos aspectos, hasta sociopolíticos. Y que nos permite, digamos, trabajar juntos a un reto que es de todos, que es global. Eso nosotros lo estamos viendo como muy positivo. ¿Cómo se percibe eso en Estados Unidos? Es decir, ¿se ve también esa variable en positivo de que puede ser un reto, pero también posiblemente es el driver de una nueva transformación o revolución de lo que hacemos, de los productos, de los servicios que estamos utilizando?
Definitely yes. And I applaud you for doing that kind of work. I mean, that really is, through all the research that I've done and then examined and evaluated for this project, that is one of the main findings, is that to then focus in on what makes our lives and livelihoods better, to focus in on that positive appeal that draws people into engaging with these topics is absolutely a successful strategy. So I can think of many examples and have written about many examples in the United States context for successfully doing that, from connections to reducing local air pollution to improving water quality, that all serve to make our lives better while addressing climate change and addressing this particular issue. Thank you.
En inglés, por favor. So, Certainly one of the things that we've started to understand is that tackling climate change at the speed and scale we need is probably going to require some kind of renegotiation between state and society, or between the kind of the rules of capitalism or whatever might come beyond that. Recognizing that in the time frame that we have, there probably does need to be a certain level of transformation of the way society works and relates to each other. And I think some of that has started to surface within the context of things like the Green New Deal in the US, and in the context of some of the climate emergency language in European Union, with cities declaring climate emergencies and saying rapid change is needed by 2030, or even the European Commission's kind of cleaner planet for all. I just wonder where you see the way in which creative climate communications can help create a permissiveness for change around the relationship between some of those state-society relations, whether it comes to something like regulation and the power of regulation at the level of the state, which often in many countries is seen as overstepping, but nonetheless, in terms of tackling climate, the economists are starting to say, look, I'm afraid regulation really has to be part of it. But have you looked particularly at the way in which climate communications is rooted in the nature of changing state-society relations?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I'm glad you asked it. Thank you. I mean, that helps pull this from psychological, cultural discussions to political and economic, necessarily political and economic discussions, because, again, this is about decarbonization of our industry and society at a rapid pace to meet the scale of the challenges that what we see through climate change. And I think it would be a mistake for me to leave you with the impression that merely talking about this in a nicer way is going to get us there. It requires fundamental, as I think you said well, transformations. And so with that in mind, there are strategies that can be deployed to help us reconsider, reevaluate our state-society relationship. Some of the examples that I bring up in the book focus in on climate contrarians, and those are folks who are given a voice, and this amplified voice oftentimes through funding from carbon-based industry interests. This oftentimes maps onto a right-of-center perspective in the United States that's a fairly anomalous blend of contrarianism about action on climate change and contrarianism even about the evidence that the climate is changing. And so some of the work that I walk through there, and have actually done in other research, is to help creatively communicate that many of those voices that have such purchase and have such sway within the halls of power in the United States, particularly at the federal level, are really outlier perspectives and that are really out of step. They're really the fossils of discussions around climate change action. And so it's not to prescribe a particular set of actions. I think the Green New Deal is effective in that it's a good first step in expanding a spectrum of possible engagements. It's not to say Green New Deal yes or no, but it is to help people in society make more informed choices about where they're getting their information, how this is being portrayed to them, and how to more critically then think about what kind of futures they want in terms of potentially, I think as you were alluding to, voting favorably for some sort of intervention like a carbon tax. And so this confronts in different ways some of that work to be done, but hopefully it provides a solid foundation for a more focused treatment and then creative experimentation in those spaces of the recasting of state-society relationships. Thanks for a good question. Feel free to follow up, too, if that's an unsatisfying answer.
Thank you very much for your conference, which was very, very appealing as well. So, I think that the society is facilitating the way of communicating many things. We are here at the university, And then after listening to these colleagues from Climate Kick, I think that society is teaching us that the way of facilitating doing something for climate change is by putting it together with business. So business and climate change is what Climate Kick is about. Then in our case now, in communication is also a difficult matter, a difficult topic as well, in the sense that scientists have maybe very little skills for communicating in general, and communicators also in general don't have the necessary background to communicate in so many topics. So then, since I think that the good example of putting together climate change, science, and business, do you think that by being here at the university would also, I mean, should university also think of giving a step forward also in putting together communicators with scientists as well?
I absolutely agree. I think emphatically the answer is yes. The more ways in which we can meaningfully overcome what are seen to be traditional disciplinary barriers to, as you suggest, pair communicators with climate scientists or other forms of that are absolutely welcomed. I don't know if, Carlos, you have anything that you'd like to say in this particular context, but at my university, there is a lot of work that's being done to overcome some of these disciplinary barriers. I should point out that, you know, part of this book actually goes through academic climate advocacy and some of the promises that are involved there, and then some of the perils as well. And I talk about different forms of advocacy. The reason that I bring this up now is that not all researchers are interested in communicating about their work. And so providing a space at this university or elsewhere to help them get the tools that they need for others to make sense of the work that they've done is absolutely critical. Okay. So there's 30 minutes until the kickoff of...
Hola. Gracias por su conferencia. Quería hacer una pequeña reflexión para saber su opinión. El reto del cambio climático, dicho por Mario José Molina, el primer Nobel mexicano que descubrió el agujero de ozono, es el primer problema global de verdad. En segundo lugar, creo que es un esfuerzo a muy largo plazo. Y los legisladores y la gente de la política muchas veces actúa como si no hubiera largo plazo. Solo están hablando del corto plazo e incluso están utilizando en la comunicación el presentarse como luchadores del cambio climático en cuanto a las palabras, pero luego vemos que no en cuanto a las acciones. Y la tercera dimensión es la dimensión del cambio climático, que afecta a todo el planeta, y la urgencia porque el cambio climático se está acelerando. Entonces, todas estas dimensiones dan un conjunto muy complejo, muchas veces de comunicar y de que la gente lo entienda. Entonces, ¿cómo deberíamos intentar movernos en este laberinto de comunicación y de contradicción que hay entre el mundo de la política, el mundo de la comunicación y la opinión pública para que nosotros también aceleráramos las acciones a favor de luchar contra el cambio climático?
That's a great example with Mario Molina and the work that he had done in the 1980s to raise awareness about ozone and the connections with climate change. One of the really effective ways that he did that was talking about what is an ozone hole. And essentially that is an analogy. That is a way to describe the scientific phenomena of stratospheric ozone depletion. And so he provides, I think, a wonderful example of ways in which that had prompted a level of engagement that hadn't been seen before. Climate change is a different challenge. We've seen that in the policy sphere where it's a different kind of challenge, whereas addressing the ozone layer required regulation and a transition of a particular set of companies producing that ozone depleting chemical. Climate change is different in that it does talk about the entire carbon-based industry in our shared society. However, there are other analogies that can be very helpful there. Some that I've discussed in this book that can be helpful are things like the bathtub, where you turn on the spigot of the bathtub and the bathtub is filling, which is greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, faster than the drain is letting it come out, which is the cycling from the atmosphere to other spheres, be it the hydrosphere or lithosphere or biosphere. And so that bathtub analogy can be helpful. I think what I interpret as you're pointing to is the need for us to smarten up, think carefully about effective ways to discuss different aspects of climate change. There have been ways in which we haven't effectively done this, and we've discovered that certain deadlines, for instance, of 12 years to save the planet is an interpretation of the fall IPCC 1.5 degree report, may actually paralyze the general public rather than motivate action. But it's that kind of experimentation that Mario Molina had done successfully and maybe very intuitively at that point is the kind of work that's being done now at various levels in social sciences and humanities. And that's where we need to continue to work in a coordinated way to get our communications environment unstuck.
¿No hay ninguna pregunta más?
Okay, thank you very much for your interesting talk and for making us to think about climate and climate communication. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Nada, reiterar de nuevo nuestra enhorabuena y nuestras felicitaciones a Métode por sus 100 números. Muchas gracias a todos por su asistencia y les invitamos a las siguientes conferencias del ciclo de grandes retos de la ciencia que seguro que serán tan interesantes como el de hoy. Buenas noches.